Hello everybody, my name is Louise Blackburn and I'm one of the directors of Challenging Education.
Hi, I'm Simon Blackburn. I'm one of the other directors of Challenging Education.
And I'm Trevor Sutcliffe. I'm the third of the directors of Challenging Education.
We'd like to give you a really warm welcome to this taster session for our professional learning programme on thinking differently for disadvantaged learners. If you'd like any more information on the professional learning programme and what it's all about, then there's also a little promotional video all about it, or you can go directly to our website, which is www.challengingeducation.co.uk. And we really hope you do go and have a little look at what this programme is all about, because we're very excited about it.
Just need to mention a very important point before we go any further. We recognise that disadvantaged learners aren't a homogeneous group. They're not all the same. And we will make some sweeping generalisations in some of the work that we do within these videos. We just wanted to make sure that you're aware that we don't think that they are a homogeneous group. But what we do know, unfortunately, is that this group of children, on average, tend to underperform year after year after year, which is why we're so passionate about doing something for these children.
So for this taster session, we want to take a look at one of the sections in the Great Teaching Toolkit, the evidence review, which came out in June 2020. And if you wanted to get access to this report, you could just go to greatteaching.com. And this actual report breaks teaching down into 4 priorities. And within those 4 priorities, within each one, there are a number of elements. And altogether, there are 17 elements that make up great teaching. And just wanted to go through briefly what they are and have a little look at how they're broken down. So the first priority is understanding the content. And there are 4 elements within there. The second priority is creating a supportive environment. The third of those priorities is about maximising the opportunity to learn. And the fourth priority is activating hard thinking. And we want to take some time today looking at the first of those priorities, which is understanding the content. Before we go into the level of detail, I just wanted to talk about this slide, which we share quite a lot with people. It's about the difference between equality and equity. And we recognise the research that's out there that tells us that if every disadvantaged child is in receipt of high quality teaching, then that will have an impact on their attainment. And they'll be able to make great gains in their learning over the course of a year, for example, compared to a poor performing teacher. However, if everybody gets the same, the likelihood is that it won't have the lasting difference and it won't have the desired impact that we want on our most disadvantaged learner. So we are going to expect and require additionality to provide equity, giving those most disadvantaged children more of what they need in order to achieve the highest they possibly can over a period of time.
So we're just going to have a look at these 4 areas, and one particular of the 4 areas, the understanding the content, and try and focus in on what it means for disadvantaged learners. As Trevor said, we've got to think about what more we need to do for our disadvantaged learners. So we've got this part here, which is about great teachers understanding the content they're teaching and how it's learned. And we all know that we've been into lessons where the teachers got excellent subject knowledge, fantastic pedagogical skills, and they maximise the learning, and it's a pleasure to observe that kind of lesson. So why is it even more important for teachers to understand the content when they're teaching children from a disadvantaged background? It's because our disadvantaged children really need to understand it even more deeply, and we need to make sure that the teachers understand it even more deeply so they can make sure they can identify misconceptions and address those when they're teaching the children. Louise, I think you've got an example for us.
Yeah, I think particularly picking up on that idea of misconceptions, this is where a disadvantaged learner can massively fall behind. If a teacher hasn't got that real strength and confidence in subject knowledge, a misconception can be identified as a mistake instead and not picked up. So, for example, if you're in a Key Stage 3 geography lesson, which we've all seen this happen, and the teacher doesn't emphasise the difference between weathering and erosion, the fact that they're 2 different things. Now, that might be just because they presume everybody understands it, because actually their subject knowledge is excellent, or it might be because their subject knowledge isn't good enough for them to know really the difference between those 2 things. Now, that isn't a major problem during Key Stage 3, but as soon as those children move into Key Stage 4, they really need to understand the difference between those 2 terms. And if they don't, that misconception has a huge impact on their future performance in this example of in physical geography. So there's lots of examples there, but the disadvantaged learner is at a greater disadvantage because they tend to lack those backup systems that will add in value outside of the classroom to their learning and to their understanding.
So it's a real pitfall then, isn't it, Louise, that teachers are assuming a basic contextual understanding of the work which they're going through, which leaves the child at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
And we all know as well, of course, that we've got to have a toolkit that we have in order to make sure we can readdress the same learning in a different way to make sure that children have another chance of understanding it as well.
Yeah, and in order to do that, they've got to have that great subject knowledge. They've got to understand the subject well enough to know how to present it in 15 different ways, to recognise the misconceptions and everything like that. So yeah, absolutely.
And to know where it's come from, so that they can go back to those building blocks if they're necessary in order to build on those in this lesson.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Trev. Other elements of this dimension, obviously, in terms of understanding the context, that deep and fluent knowledge on the teacher's part is really, really important, but also understanding, as Trevor's just said, about where it's come from. What are the dependencies of the knowledge we're talking about now compared to what has gone before? And also, what are they going to need to teach in order to make sure that children can understand that next? What are the curriculum tasks? What assessments are coming up? What activities are involved? And what are the student strategies that we can actually get involved to make sure that children can show us their misconceptions as well? So another question, what should schools think about when they're structuring their curriculum to maximise the chances of success for disadvantaged learners? This is a key question. It's really important that we address this. And Trevor, I think you've got an example for us. We'll start with that, shall we?
Yeah, I mean, part of this is knowing what the gaps might be in the learning in the first place, to think about what that order might look like in terms of what we're going to teach. And in one example, in a primary school, I saw that they were planning to teach a series of lessons around a book where Paddington Goes to London. And upon looking at the book prior to teaching it, there was a recognition that there were a number of elements in there that the most disadvantaged child would not have that experience of, would not be able to associate with, would not be able to comment about in the way that maybe other children would, because they'd never been outside of their local area, never mind thinking about going to London. So what this school actually did is they did some pre-teaching, they did some non-fiction work in the week before, talking about London, talking about some of the key landmarks in London, and some of the key things that happen in London, such as changing the guard, so that when they were to move on to the fiction book about Paddington, they were able to understand what that story was about, what Paddington was going to see, and why it was important.
That's brilliant. So those teachers are starting by thinking, what do I need the most disadvantaged children to be able to understand even before I think about them being successful in this lesson? They're really thinking about what support's going to be there before, during the lesson, and how can we make sure all of our teachers do this? All really important questions.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, for different people in different roles, so this is just as important for an additional adult, whether they be an LSA, a teaching assistant, a volunteer in the classroom. If they are working with our most disadvantaged learners, we really need them to have that depth of understanding, either of the sequence or the subject knowledge, so that they can support our most disadvantaged learners. And if we know they don't have that depth, because it's not their role to have that depth, then we make sure the person with the depth is the one working with the disadvantaged learners.
Thank you, Louise.
With this video, there's a PDF document, and the PDF document is there as a self-reflection tool for you to go away and have a look and think about some of the questions that you can see on the screen there. And they're written slightly different in the PDF to really get you to think. And if you're in a role where you're in a leadership capacity, you need to think about the wider sense of some of these questions and whether this involves other colleagues that you could work with to get involved. But also, if you were in a different capacity in school, one where you felt you weren't necessarily part of a decision-making process, think about your own individual approach and what you might do. And you can see on here, there are some of the things we've talked about, such as sequencing learning. Are we making any assumptions in background knowledge of our disadvantaged learners? So we'd encourage you to go away, look at that PDF document and start to complete it for yourself and think about and reflect upon what can I do as an individual in order to address some of the things that are raised as these questions.
So thanks very much, everybody, for listening to our little taster session. And we really do hope that you go onto our website and find out more about the Professional Learning Programme.